Jack slumped into his worn-out couch, the quiet hum of his refrigerator the only sound in the apartment. Outside, the faint twinkle of Christmas lights lined his neighbor's balcony, casting fragmented shadows through his window. He hadn't bothered to unpack the box of decorations he'd pulled from the closet weeks ago. What was the point? The holiday spirit seemed like a cruel joke when all he felt was an unbearable hollowness. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting him out of his spiraling thoughts. He stared at the screen. A text from Mary? He frowned, unsure of what to make of it. Mary. Hi, Jack. I know this might sound strange, but if you don't have plans for Christmas Eve, I'd love to have you over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just company. Jack stared at the message, his mind cycling through a mix of surprise and reluctance. Mary wasn't someone he knew well. She'd always been on the outskirts of their social group, a quiet woman with a habit of speaking her mind at the wrong time. He remembered the jokes, the whispers people made when she left the room. He'd laughed along with them, though now he felt a pang of guilt. Still, the thought of spending another Christmas alone in his silent apartment was unbearable. He picked up his phone and typed back. Jack, thanks, Mary. I'd love to come over. What time? Her reply came quickly, almost as if she'd been waiting. Mary, 7 p.m., nothing fancy, I promise. Jack chuckled to himself. Nothing fancy seemed to be her motto. The evening arrived, and Jack stood outside Mary's apartment building, clutching a small bottle of wine he'd picked up on the way. The snow crunched under his boots as he shifted nervously. Why did this feel so much like a date? Shaking the thought from his head, he knocked on her door. Mary opened it almost immediately, her face lighting up with a smile. She wore a soft red sweater, her hair loosely tied back. The scent of something warm and sweet wafted from inside. Mary made it. Come in. Jack stepped inside, surprised by the warmth of her home. Strings of fairy lights wrapped around the windows, and a tiny Christmas tree stood in the corner, its mismatched ornaments a far cry from the polished displays he'd seen elsewhere. Yet it felt real, charming in a way he hadn't expected. Your place looks great, cozy. That's code for small, isn't it? No, I mean it. It feels warm. She gestured for him to sit at the small dining table, which was set for two. The plates didn't match, and the centerpiece was just a jar of candy canes, but it all felt effortlessly inviting. I hope you like chicken pot pie. It's my grandmother's recipe. Sounds perfect. As they ate, Jack found himself relaxing, the awkwardness melting away. Mary's dry humor and sharp observations caught him off guard, and he realized how little he actually knew about her. So, what made you say yes? Pity? Curiosity? Jack nearly choked on his wine. What? No, I just didn't want to be alone, I guess. Honest, I like that. Her openness surprised him. Most people danced around their loneliness, hiding it behind social media posts or endless distractions. But Mary was different. She didn't seem to care what people thought. Do you ever feel, I don't know, like you're tired of trying to fit in? All the time. But I stopped trying years ago. People either accept you for who you are, or they don't. The trick is learning to accept yourself. Her words hung in the air, resonating with him in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was talking to someone who truly understood him. As the evening wore on, Jack found himself laughing more than he had in months. When he finally left, the snow falling gently around him, he realized something had shifted. Mary wasn't just a way to escape his loneliness. She was someone who made him feel seen, even in his darkest moments. For the first time that holiday season, Jack didn't dread the next day. He even thought about unpacking those decorations when he got home. Jack returned to Mary's apartment the following week, an unspoken pull drawing him back. What had started as an obligation now felt like something he wanted, a reprieve from the weight of his thoughts. He knocked on her door, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet hallway. Mary opened it with a smile that reached her eyes, though there was a flicker of surprise there. Mary, back already? I must have done something right the first time. Well, the pie helped, but I figured I'd check if the company was consistent too. Her laugh was soft, but it lingered in the air. She stepped aside, letting him in. This time, the scent of cinnamon hung in the room, mingling with the warmth of the heater. Mary, I made snickerdoodles. Don't get too excited. They might be a little overdone. Jack took a seat at the small dining table, now cluttered with art supplies. Watercolor brushes and tubes of paint were scattered across the surface, along with half-finished sketches. He picked up a small canvas, studying the soft hues of a snowy landscape. This is yours? It's beautiful. Mary hesitated, a faint blush creeping up her neck. Yeah, I paint sometimes. It's just a hobby. You don't give yourself enough credit. This looks like something you'd see in a gallery. Her laugh was self-deprecating as she grabbed the canvas from his hands. Okay, now I know you're lying. What do you want? More pie? I'm serious, Mary. You've got talent. Why not show it off? Her expression softened, but her shoulders tensed. People don't really notice things like that, at least not from me. I'm not exactly the kind of person who draws attention. The weight in her words hit Jack harder than he expected. He realized how often she must have been overlooked, dismissed by people who didn't bother to look past the surface. Maybe they just don't know what they're missing. She stared at him for a moment, her gaze searching, as if trying to decide whether he meant it. Finally, she smiled, a quiet but genuine curve of her lips. You're not like most people, are you? The evening passed easily, their conversations flowing from light-hearted banter to deeper confessions. Jack found himself opening up about his failed relationship, the breakup that left him untethered. Jack, we had plans, you know? A house, maybe kids. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being us. It was like living with a stranger. Mary nodded, her fingers idly tracing patterns on the table. I think that happens to a lot of people. They forget how to really see each other. It's easier to hold on to the idea of someone than to face the reality that they've changed. Her words struck a chord, and for a moment, Jack wondered how someone who claimed to be invisible could understand so much about human connection. Jack, how do you know all this? She shrugged, her smile tinged with sadness. You learn a lot when you spend most of your life watching from the sidelines. Jack felt a pang of regret. He had been one of those people who never really noticed her, who let the whispers of others shape his perception. But now, sitting across from her, he couldn't imagine how anyone could ignore her. As the night wore on, Mary pulled out an old record player and set the needle on a scratchy vinyl, the room filled with the soft croon of a jazz singer, the melody both soothing and melancholic. Dance with me. Jack blinked, caught off guard. Jack, I don't dance. Good thing I didn't ask if you were good at it. Come on. She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he took it. They moved awkwardly at first, shuffling more than swaying, but the tension melted away with each passing second. Okay, I take it back. You might be worse than me. You're just jealous I'm leading. The music played on, and the space between them seemed to shrink. Jack's hand lingered at the small of her back, and for the first time in years, he felt truly present. As the song ended, Mary stepped back, her cheeks flushed, though whether it was from the dance or something else, Jack couldn't tell. Thanks for indulging me. Anytime. The sincerity in his voice made her pause. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. When Jack left that night, the cold winter air felt sharper, but his chest felt lighter. He couldn't explain it, but being around Mary made everything seem a little less bleak. For the first time in a long while, he found himself looking forward to what came next. Jack found himself knocking on Mary's door more often as December wore on. Each visit felt like peeling back another layer of her life, revealing a woman who was far more complex than he'd ever realized. Tonight, the air was sharp and cold, but his anticipation made the walk to her apartment almost warm. He carried a small bag of coffee beans he'd picked up from a local roaster, remembering Mary mentioning how she loved the smell of fresh coffee. The door swung open before he could knock a second time. Mary stood there, her hair loosely tied back, her cheeks flushed. Right on time. I was starting to think you got lost in the snow. I come bearing gifts. He handed her the bag, and her face lit up as she brought it to her nose, inhaling deeply. Fresh coffee? You're spoiling me, Jack. She stepped aside, letting him into her cozy apartment. The small tree in the corner now had a few new ornaments, a glinting star on top, and a few candy canes hanging from its branches. Tree's looking good? Did you finally cave and let someone help you decorate? Mary, funny. I had some downtime and decided it needed a little more love. They settled into their usual spots. Jack on the worn couch, Mary perched on the armrest. The room was warm, both from the heat of the radiator and the faint cinnamon scent that always seemed to linger. So, how was your week? Any exciting Christmas plans? Jack shrugged. Not really. Work's been slow, and everyone I know is busy with their families or significant others. Mary tilted her head, studying him. Does it bother you? Spending the holidays alone? He hesitated. It used to. This year, not so much. Her lips quirked into a small smile. Mary, am I supposed to take credit for that? You wouldn't be wrong. There was a brief pause, the kind of silence that felt less like a void and more like a space to breathe. As the evening progressed, the conversation grew deeper. Mary shared stories of her childhood, moments Jack hadn't expected to hear from someone so guarded. When I was a kid, I'd stay up late on Christmas Eve, staring out the window, waiting for something magical to happen. Did it? She shook her head, her smile bittersweet. Not really, but there was something about the waiting, the hope, that felt enough. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're still waiting, aren't you? For something, or someone. Her gaze flickered to him, caught off guard by the question. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was quieter. Maybe. Or maybe I've just gotten used to making my own magic. Jack stood, walking to the kitchen to refill his mug. On the counter, he noticed a stack of unopened Christmas cards, their bright red and green envelopes contrasting sharply with the muted tones of the apartment. You didn't open these? Mary turned, following his gaze. They're from people who only remember I exist during the holidays. You know, the obligatory Merry Christmas, hope you're well kind of thing. Jack picked up one of the cards, running his thumb over the gold lettering. Maybe they're trying. Maybe it's their way of saying they care. She sighed, crossing her arms. Mary. Or maybe it's just easier for them to send a card than to actually call. He set the card down, turning to face her. I think people don't always know how to connect, especially when they think someone doesn't want them to. Her eyes softened, and for a moment she looked vulnerable in a way that Jack hadn't seen before. Mary, you're good at that, you know, connecting, even when people like me make it difficult. I don't think you're difficult, Mary. I think you're just waiting for someone who doesn't give up. Her breath caught, and she glanced away, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. The tension shifted as Mary suddenly stood and grabbed a deck of cards from the shelf. Okay, enough heavy stuff. Do you play poker? Jack smirked, grateful for the change in mood. Badly. But I'll warn you, I'm a sore loser. They spent the next hour playing hand after hand, laughing as Mary wiped the floor with him. She had a knack for bluffing that Jack couldn't keep up with. You're ruthless. Remind me never to bet real money with you. What can I say? I've had practice. The night ended with the two of them sitting on the couch, sharing the last of the cookies she'd baked earlier in the week. You know, I never thought I'd look forward to Christmas again. But this year, she tilted her head, waiting for him to finish. This year feels different, better. Mary didn't respond right away, but the way her hand brushed against his on the couch spoke volumes. As he left that night, the snow falling softly around him, Jack realized something. Mary wasn't just someone who filled the void of his loneliness. She was becoming someone he didn't want to imagine his life without. Christmas Eve arrived, and Jack found himself standing outside Mary's door with a wrapped gift in hand. The snow fell steadily, muffling the sounds of the city, and his breath clouded in the cold air. He adjusted the scarf she'd knitted for him, a small smile tugging at his lips. It was strange how much had changed in the past few weeks. What had started as a way to avoid loneliness had turned into something he couldn't quite name, but knew he didn't want to lose. When the door opened, Mary greeted him with her usual warm smile, but there was something different about her tonight. She wore a deep green sweater that complemented her eyes, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. "You're right on time. I was starting to think you got lost." "Jack. And miss Christmas dinner? Never." He stepped inside, the warmth of her apartment wrapping around him like a blanket. The tiny Christmas tree in the corner glowed softly, and the scent of roasted vegetables and baked ham filled the air. "I hope you're hungry. I might have gone overboard." "Starving. But first, this is for you." He handed her the gift, watching as her expression shifted from surprise to curiosity. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a set of watercolor paints and brushes. "Jack, it's perfect." Her voice caught, and she looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I remembered you said you'd been using the same brushes for years. Thought it might be time for an upgrade." She smiled, but there was something deeper behind it. Gratitude, perhaps, or something she wasn't ready to put into words. "I got you something too. It's not much, but..." She handed him a small package. Inside was a leather-bound journal, simple yet elegant. "You know, I've never kept a journal before." "Maybe it's time to start. You've got stories worth writing down." Dinner was a quiet affair, filled with easy conversation and laughter. Jack found himself marveling at how natural it felt to be here, in this tiny apartment, sharing a meal with Mary. Afterward, they moved to the couch, mugs of hot chocolate warming their hands. The soft glow of the Christmas tree bathed the room in a gentle light. "So, what's the verdict? Best Christmas Eve ever?" "It's definitely up there." She laughed, setting her mug down on the coffee table. Her expression turned thoughtful as she looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why me? I mean, you could have spent tonight with anyone, so why did you choose to come here?" He hesitated, the weight of her question catching him off guard. "Because you see me, Mary, and not just the parts I show everyone else. Being around you feels real." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sweater. "You're going to make me cry if you keep talking like that. Would that be such a bad thing?" She glanced back at him, her eyes searching his. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, alive with something unspoken. Jack leaned forward, his voice softer now. "I never expected this, you know. Coming here, spending time with you, it's changed everything for me." "Me too." The space between them seemed to shrink, and before he could second-guess himself, Jack reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she closed the gap, her hand fitting perfectly in his. "Merry Christmas, Jack. Merry Christmas, Mary." They sat there for hours, their hands entwined, talking about everything and nothing at all. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in quiet peace. For the first time in years, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And he knew, deep down, that this Christmas Eve would be the start of something neither of them had dared to hope for.